And I feel like I'm saying that, like, don't trust the media. You have to hear what they're saying. That's not what I mean. But there's just something that can't be captured, even in a soundbite or in a well-written news story, that you get when you're sitting in a room with someone.
Emily, thank you so much for joining me today. This is a topic I've been really wanting to jump into, so I'm thrilled to be able to start with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk
What
about
is your relationship to early U.S. history?
So I became a big history fan when I was a student in high school. I took a really great AP US history class, and that like really energized me and made me feel really passionate about US history. And one of the things I loved learning about the most was about political campaigns. Our history textbook was filled with old political cartoons from the period. And it was like just like a riot. I just loved hearing different slogans and seeing the way these things were depicted in the political cartoons of the day. And it just really made what otherwise might have been kind of like a dry topic seem really lively and human and kind of hilarious. One of my friends from high school literally just the other day texted me with like a political slogan from the 1800s that had become an inside joke. So big into this stuff. And it's always been true that if someone can come up with something like really memorably awful to say about you, then it's going to hurt. So I'm going to probably get some of the facts wrong. But there were these like horribly mean rhymes about Mein Van Buren, about what a like snob he was. But the one I remember is, old Tip, he wears no homespun shirt and he's little squirt, wort. And it just like went on from there. And it was just like hilarious. It was like, you know, schoolyard like taunts, but it was being said like from one candidate to another in the public sphere. And it's just really fascinating to me that as like a teen to realize like olden time people were super petty, just like we are today.
Do you remember the first election that you voted in?
I do. I remember it so vividly. So it was in the 1996 election.
Mm-hmm.
And I was away at college. And so I had turned 18 over the summer, went away to college, and I got to vote in a presidential election the very first time out of the gate. Super exciting. I was on the other side of the country, so I couldn't come home to vote. So I voted absentee. And I'm from Oregon. And as you may or may not know, Oregon loves a ballot measure. So our ballots are always like super long. There's always a ton of stuff on there. So I wasn't just voting for a president. I was also voting on all this other stuff. And I remember finding like the one other freshman who I knew was from Oregon and going to his dorm room. And we did what Oregonians do, which is we sat down and talked about every single ballot measure and like argued back and forth about what we thought, you know, are you going to vote for this? Why or why not? And cast our ballot for president as well. I don't remember what other offices were on that ballot, but I do remember being so stoked that I got to vote for a president my very first time. Which was, of course, the Clinton-Dole race, just for your listeners who may not have been around in 1996 or remember which one that was.
That was a wild time to come into age of voting.
But it was just so exciting to be able to vote for a president because, you know, I knew enough to know that this only happens every 4 years. And like to get to have my very first election I voted in be a presidential one, I was stoked because my parents voted every election, whether it was a presidential election or not. So I knew that you didn't always get, you know, to do that. And I was like, yes.
So you have a lot of experience in a newsroom and especially you said with local elections. So can you just tell us a bit about that experience and how you saw it really having a direct effect?
Sure. So I worked for my local newspaper for 13 years. And for about 6 of those years, I was the head of our editorial board, which meant that, among other things, I invited in candidates for local office to come in and meet with our editorial board, describe their position on the issues, and request our endorsement as a newspaper of record. So local candidates would come in, but also our state senators would come in, our U.S. senators and our House of Representatives candidates would come before our board seeking our endorsement. So I got to meet Chuck Schumer. I got to meet Kirsten Gillibrand when she was running for Hillary Clinton's old office. and of course, local officials too. So that was really exciting for me as still a fairly young person to be like sitting, in a small room with U.S. Senator and be able to talk to them and have a conversation with them as two human beings. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And that really, it really struck me how intensely valuable those kinds of conversations were for me as a voter, to have an understanding of who these people were, what their thoughts and beliefs and positions really were, in a way that I have since found is really difficult to get through the filter of media. That I think you can read stories or position papers or go on the candidate's website and you can get, I think, a loose, broad, general understanding of, what are they all about? Where do they stand on the issues? But there is no substitute for actually seeing or hearing them in conversation, in dialogue about the issues. And I feel like I'm saying that, like, don't trust the media. You have to hear it for yourself. And that's not what I mean. But there's just something that can't be captured, even in a soundbite or in a well-written news story, that you get when you're sitting in a room with someone. And that's what I learned, that no matter how well we tried to do our jobs to capture, here's who this guy is, who's running for office, here's what he thinks, here's where he stands on the issues. It was always felt impossible for me to distill down what I had heard and felt sitting in that room into something that was really going to be meaningful and valuable to voters, even though that's what we were trying to do. The human touch is irreplaceable. And that really struck me because A, most people don't get that opportunity. But B, we do actually get those opportunities. Candidates do go out and they stump and they come to your town and they have a town hall and they stand up in front of people. And it is so valuable to have that kind of unfiltered access to a politician that I really encourage people to take advantage of.
How much control did you have over the editing and what context you could add?
Yeah. So we, our newsroom was pretty free. I think this is true of most local papers. Like, I don't think there's a lot of thumbs being put on scales at the local journalism level about local elections. I think that if we didn't want to endorse a candidate, our publisher could have cared less. And if we thought someone did something stupid and we wanted to write about it, I know that there's been scrutiny on who's sort of holding the steering wheel at the higher levels of journalism, the large media outlets. And I think there are very serious concerns about that. But I think your local media outlets are still a really good opportunity to find unfiltered, at least opinions, more.
How does local media differ from the other tiers of it in terms of their influence?
The first thing I think is that almost all local media is, woefully underfunded and understaffed and under-resourced. And almost all local political decision-making right now is happening in the equivalent of a darkened room. Mm-hmm. Like, no one is watching most of what is happening in local government. Full stop. And that's not because local media doesn't want to cover it and doesn't think it's important. It's simply because they cannot cover most of the things that are happening. So things that are happening in your city, in your county, even at the state level, are going mostly unreported. For most of us, the only way to find out is to go to the meetings, which is impossible for most people.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's really important, and this is going back to what I was saying before, I think it's really important for the people who can to get into the room and to hear and listen and speak and be part of the process, just as you did. Not everyone can join the council, right? But if you can, I think you should. If you can run for office, I think you should. If you can go to the meeting, I think you should. Mm-hmm. Because, democracy dies in darkness. And sunlight is the best disinfectant. And the more eyes that are on what local government is doing and what local politicians are saying, the better for everyone. And if it can't be your eyes, then hopefully it's someone else's eyes that you can trust. It is very easy to get caught up in misinformation. And this is something that I have tried consistently to model for my daughter, is to sort of get in the habit of citing my sources when I'm talking about something happening in my community. So I try to have the mental discipline of transparency to say, I saw someone post this on Facebook and I don't know if it's true, but it sounded like they're cutting down some trees on Main Street next week. I wonder if that's really happening. So that she can hear that uncertainty and the fact that the things we see online or hear someone say, we might not know if it's accurate, but we can still talk about it and wonder about it. Because, we don't really know a lot of what's going on in our local government for the most part. And it is really easy to hear one or two things and sort of get caught up in like, oh no, or whatever people think is going on. And it sometimes is hard to get the facts. And that stinks.
Did you have experience like trying to decipher what they're talking about to the public in any digestible way?
Yes and no. So I was an editor, not a reporter. So I didn't cover stuff. Usually I was, that filter layer. I was sending reporters out to the Common Council meeting, and then they were coming back and telling me what happened. So we could decide together, what's the story here? What's the headline going to be? What's the most important, interesting, significant thing that happened during those 2.5 hours of people sitting, talking, that our readers need to know about, and how can we contextualize it for them in a way that's going to make it meaningful, and do all this, in 45 minutes before deadline and in, 500 words or fewer. So I was part of those conversations, but I wasn't the one doing the actual hard work of writing the story. And then I was the one the next morning cheap shot and second guessing it and saying, Mark, you buried the lead. The most important thing in the story is in your 5th paragraph. Like, why wasn't that the lead? Just because it happened at the end of the meeting doesn't mean it has to be at the end of the story. And it's an art, not a science. After there was some recent news event, when the convictions came down for Donald Trump, you look at 10 different news stories and you've got sort of 10 different versions of 10 different news leads. The same thing happened, but the Wall Street Journal is going to write that story in a different way than, the Guardian UK, because they're writing for different audiences. Their focuses are different. And it doesn't mean that anyone is, in my opinion, distorting the facts or spinning the news. This is what we do. If my mom asks me, how was your day? I'm going to give her a different answer than if my daughter asked me, how was your day? Because my relationship to that person is different. Their interest is in different things. That's the way it works. I think what we tried to do was really to focus on our audience, to understand who we were writing for, and to try our best to share the information that we thought would be relevant to the people we were writing for, the people in our community. I don't think we always got it right. I think sometimes our own interests may have overridden what our community was actually interested in, right? Which is the challenge as for any writer. But I think that was our goal, was to say, how is this going to affect our local area? What is this going to mean for people who live here? How is this going to change life where we live? And I think that, that's the number one thing that any outlet should do, is know their audience and write for their audience, and not write for an imagined fantasy audience that doesn't really exist. Like, serve the people, give them what they want, but also give them what they need. You have to be a proxy and try to ask the questions that you think your audience wants answers to, and try to get those answers from elected officials, from politicians, from people running for office, because they're not always going to volunteer that information. I live in New York now. I grew up in Oregon, but I live in New York now. And during COVID, famously, Governor Cuomo gave these lengthy, operatic, dramatic live media briefings, almost every day. It was must-watch television. And, he was very good at what he did. And he shared a lot of really important information in those briefings. And it was really valuable. But you had to stay for the media questions at the end, because that's when you would find out the stuff you actually wanted to know. Because he would throw away a sentence about this new program we're rolling out. And then it was the 10 follow-up questions from the media. When's this going to start? Who's going to be eligible? How do they apply? That's when you got the actual details that people actually needed. And to my way of thinking, that's what good journalism should do, is to dig down to the details and get the info that people actually need so that they can do something or make a decision or understand, what does this mean for me? How's this going to affect my life? Okay, you said this is going to happen in the state. Well, what about me? That's what journalism should do, is answer those what about me questions. And I think that's what we tried to do with the paper. This judge said that he would be more lenient about parolees. Well, what does that mean? What would that mean in our community? What would that mean to me? What would that mean to my cousin who's in jail right now? What would that mean to the guy who just robbed my house? Those are the questions that journalism should ask, and that politicians and candidates and elected officials need to be asked so that they can be held accountable.
Have you read or seen a politician or leader that you think really does go into more detail in anywhere, local, national?
I think that I saw a lot of White House briefings in the Obama and Biden White Houses where the media spokesperson did come ready with like some facts, some figures, some details. And I thought that was great to see, like, because that's, I'm a communications professional now. I'm on the other side of the table. And that's supposed to be our job, is similarly to anticipate the questions and have the answers. And, I advise school district officials in my current role, not politicians, not elected officials, but, they still are held accountable to the public. So yeah, now I'm the one saying, you're going to get asked about this. You're going to need an answer. And, you can say this. And I encourage you to say that, even if you don't want to talk about that. They're going to ask you about it, and you're going to need to have an answer. It's still the same thing.
Let's shift to teenagers, to youth. How do you think that traditional media first would get to them?
I don't think traditional media is getting to young voters, which is not the end of the world. But I think many of the things that have replaced it, like social media content, are simply not offering the same level of credibility and thoughtfulness and depth of research. So, and it's very obviously not just young people and teenagers who have sort of drifted into this way of being where, like, we're just running lots of vibes. Like, don't worry about facts. Like, it's all just feelings. And it's really disheartening as a journalist to confront that. I guess what I would suggest to young people and or their parents is, and this kind of brings us full circle to what I opened with, it's just to talk about this stuff, to have conversations. We know that even as young people age into adolescence, the influence of adults who raise them is still of higher significance than almost anything else in their life. So parents can provide that foundation. One of the parents' values and beliefs when it comes to government and politics and voting. And that's really important, I think, for adolescents who are about to cast their first vote to know and understand, like, what do we do in this family when it's election time, right? What do we do in this family to decide who we're going to vote for? How does that work? How do you guys decide who you're going to vote for? Those are conversations that should be happening in the home. There's like almost zero chance that the average teen voter is going to well, let me sit down and see what the New York Times has to say about these two presidential candidates. It simply isn't going to happen. So what could replace that or supplant that or support that? It should still be those dinner table conversations with the people that you have relationships with, so you understand what their values are.
Mm-hmm. In terms of who young people are influenced by too, how do you think that media can help or hinder what they're hearing from TikTok or Twitch or YouTube?
For the most part, the information or the conversation is happening on one of those platforms, but it's just not going to reach young people. But I would also imagine that if, my daughter's a huge Swiftie, she's 12. If she were exposed to information about who a politician that Taylor Swift had endorsed, I think that would be hugely impactful on her. How could it? That's the whole point of endorsements. That's their entire job, or even a mention of or a reference to, even if it's not now endorsement. It's if your favorite YouTuber speaks favorably of a certain candidate, it has to have an impact on young people. Like it couldn't not. And, who knows? Maybe it would cause that ick factor that you just mentioned. Maybe someone is like, oh, I really like this YouTuber, but they just mentioned a certain politician who I like really don't like. And now I don't want to watch that YouTube channel anymore. Yeah, that's one of the ways this can work too. I don't know how much of that is going on in those spaces, but I would have to imagine that it's at this point probably more impactful than any conventional media on that demographic, for better or for worse.
Yeah. And what would be something that you would see, maybe watching or hearing something about the election with your daughter, that would make you stop and like have a conversation about what's happening, either the way it's being presented, primarily the way it's being presented?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think of it more as lots of little things and not one big thing. I think that a good goal for parents to engage in these conversations with their kids is to make the invisible visible. You as a parent probably engage in any number of like small or large political acts. You might donate to campaigns. You might share information on social media. You might be even more or less involved in some of this stuff. Talk about that in front of your kids. Let them hear and see how you are living out your values with regard to this election so that it's visible to them. And that should open up conversations. Maybe they heard someone say something at school. Maybe they saw something online about an issue or a candidate or something. And if you're already bringing those topics forward in their presence, then hopefully it will prompt them, to ask you about it, to say something about it. So-and-so at school said this. Well, let's talk about that. And the other thing, which I touched on before, that I try to do is model for my daughter the difference between facts and opinions, right? And the limitations of my own knowledge. I don't have any problem saying in front of my daughter that I think a certain politician sounded like a jerk when they said X, Y, or Z, or I thought it was really disgusting that they did this, because those are my opinions and my daughter is welcome to all of those. I try to stop short of saying this person is this person is that, because that's a statement of fact and it's not being presented as an opinion. And also the limitations of my own knowledge. I heard somewhere, and I don't remember where, that the Supreme Court is going to take up this case. But you know what? I don't actually remember a lot of the details about it. So I'm going to try to read more about that later and model for her that thought process of understanding the limitations of my own knowledge or awareness about an issue and what could I do if I wanted to be more well-informed about it. Oh, and my husband and I have conversations like this all the time. I heard a segment on the radio about this, but I didn't catch all the details. Did you hear that? Do you know what's going on with that? Oh, yeah, I read this article here. And then we'll have the conversation so that like my daughter can see in real time, how does one become informed about these issues? And, is it enough if you just heard a snippet on the radio? Are you well informed about that issue? And so on and so forth. And I think it's those many, many little things that add up to modeling for our kids. What does it look like to be an engaged political citizen? And that question, that thing I said before, like how does our family do this? What are our family's values around voting, around political involvement, and showing your child where you would seek out additional information about a topic if you wanted to learn more.
Have you ever had a situation where you had to discuss specifically with your daughter about a friend, anybody's friend, or a relation who is in complete disagreement with your values?
I feel like we have had conversations about the fact that there are people in our family who voted differently in the last presidential election than we did, and that we don't agree with them on some of those issues. But it kind of wasn't a big thing. I wanted her to know that in that didn't actually impact our relationship with those family members for us. So there wasn't a lot more I needed to say about it.
Is there anything else that you think people don't necessarily know could be a red flag or a yellow flag to hearing a headline, or where they need to dig deeper and they don't normally think they do?
This sounds alarmist, but I sort of treat all headlines as yellow flags. Like,
Yeah.
like literally any headline that I see sort of flash in front of me, my next thought is, let me see if it interests me and I want to know more about it. My next thought is like, let me see what's really going on there. Even well-written news headlines can be misleading. So like it's always worth taking 5 minutes at the minimum to sort of squint it in a little more closely and see if there's really any there. You know, there might be smoke, but is there fire? And like even for the most innocuous things, I saw a headline about the New York Yankees the other day that I was like, wait, what? And I clicked on that and it was like 2 sentences. So I was like, there's not enough here. Let me
Right.
Google this. Like found a couple more things and both of those were really short. And I was like, okay, there's really nothing here. Like that headline made it seem like something really big had happened. But when I sort of clicked through and read the words, it was like, oh, this is a nothing burger. Like there's nothing really here. This is just like a comment someone made. Nothing has really happened. So just like everything, just use your critical thinking skills and like read the words and think about.
I get all these real crappy, that's the only word I can use for them. They're just crappy, like headlines in my feed about pop culture. And, you know, I knew this was going to happen, but I saw this one that was like, so and so reveals why they never came back for season 3. And it's like, yeah, they weren't written into the, like, it just, you know, or finally reveals why this happened 3 years ago. But then it's like, it was one half a sentence they said, right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
the whole thing is about that. And then all it is an SEO salad.
Yeah. And there's 10 more paragraphs about the stuff you already knew. And the actual news nugget is like completely nothing. It's not even anything. Yeah. So making it past the headline is really important. It's really important. That's the most important thing is make it past the headline before you form your opinion, before you relate it to anyone else, for God's sake. Make it past the headline and you know, engage your thinking brain with the material that's being presented to you.
So how much should people consider not the source, not the Washington Post or this website, but the reporter themselves or the people that worked on it themselves?
That's a great question. I think in a perfect world, it shouldn't matter, but it does. You know, there's an expression that says when people show you who they are, believe them. And that I think that's true for reporters too, right? Like when reporters show you who they are through the quality of the work that they do, then that's what it is. I think it is worthwhile if you are committed to becoming better informed about an issue to identify some sources that you feel comfortable and confident in, right? So that you're not constantly having to search through the crappy headlines. And that might be an individual reporter, that might be a specific news outlet, that might even be, you know, a place where news is aggregated. But yeah, I do think it's worthwhile to kind of identify some trusted sources for information. I don't think it's reasonable to expect most news consumers to run down like the bios of every byline that they see out there. It's just too much. And the industry is such a churn that a lot of these names are going to be here today and gone tomorrow. And apparently if you're reading Sports Illustrated, 1/3 of them are bots anyway. So I think it's less about the people and more about the ecosystem that the people are operating in. And, you know, knowing it's like, I think of it as sort of like grocery shopping. It's like, know where you can find the stuff that is valuable to you. And, you know, the stuff might change from day to day. You might get a dud every now and then. But, you know, if you can find a place where you usually feel good about the stuff you're getting, then keep going back there.
Well, that's so helpful. It's such a great topic to get an experienced person's perspective on. So thank you. And I know where people can find you, but I feel like Sean from the Hot Ones, tell everybody what you're doing. You're doing such really, really, really fun work every week for parents.
Yeah, so I write a newsletter on Substack that's thinkofthechildren.substack.com, or you can just go on Substack and search for Think of the Children. So I write about the culture of parenting and the culture of education and where those two intersect and some of the things that are super hard about them. And like you, I love to interview people, mostly authors, to get their thoughts about all of this stuff. So yeah, people can find me there. And also I am on some of the socials as Emily Popek writer. You can find me there too.
Hey, well, thank you so very much. And I hope everybody goes to check out Emily's Substack specifically, not just because I'm on it 1 week or 2 weeks, but I was just looking at her past interviews, and it's really a treasure trove of helpful, actionable ways that parents can be helped. So thank you for that work.
Thank you so much for having me on to talk about this. This was super fun. And now I'm excited to talk to my daughter more about elections.